In the quiet town of Rensford, the kind of place where everyone knew each other and daily routines rarely changed, the disappearance of a teenager felt like something that could never happen. It was the fall of 1998, a time when families left their doors unlocked and the biggest worry was making it home before dinner. 16-year-old Emily Cotter was like many others her age bride, curious and full of dreams that reached beyond the boundaries of the small town. On a chilly evening in late October, she left her house to visit her best friend just 4 blocks away. She wore her favorite red jacket, the one her mother had bought her the previous Christmas, and promised she wouldn't stay out too late. But Emily never reached her destination. That short walk through the tree-lined streets of Rensford would mark the last time anyone saw her alive. The following morning, her parents realized her bed had not been slept in. At first, they thought she had stayed over at her friend's house, but a quick phone call shattered that hope. Emily had never arrived, and her friend hadn't seen her at all that night. Panic spread through the Cotter household and soon spilled into the entire community. Within hours, volunteers gathered at the local church to organize search parties. Neighbors combed through wooded trails, creeks, and abandoned barns. Police officers knocked on every door within a mile radius of the Cotter home. 4 weeks, the town moved like a single body, desperate to find the missing girl. As the days turned into weeks, the optimism began to fade. People whispered in grocery store aisles and on school playgrounds, each person spinning their own theory. Some suggested she had run away, tired of the limitations of small-town life. Others whispered darker possibilities, that someone within their community had taken her, someone they might have trusted with no leads. The police struggled to keep momentum. Flyers with Emily's smiling face were plastered on telephone poles, pinned to bulletin boards, and mailed to towns far beyond Rensford. But each tip ended in disappointment. The search seemed doomed until a disturbing discovery was made 6 months later. A farmer plowing one of his fields unearthed a plastic bag buried shallowly beneath the soil. Inside were personal belongings, things that could only belong to Emily. Her diary, pages filled with teenage thoughts and secrets, her silver necklace with a small heart-shaped pendant, and a single worn sneaker. The items were carefully wrapped and clean, as if they had been preserved intentionally, not discarded. The bag seemed less like evidence accidentally left behind, and more like a message deliberately planted. This discovery shifted the entire case. Theories of a runaway faded quickly. Someone had taken Emily, someone who wanted the town to know they held her fate in their hands. It was no longer a simple disappearance. It was something far more sinister. For Emily's parents, the discovery was both a relief and a nightmare. They had proof their daughter had not simply vanished. But the nature of the evidence suggested they were dealing with someone meticulous, calculating, and cruel. And for the town of Rensford, the sense of safety that had once defined their lives was shattered forever. Nearly a year had passed since Emily Carter's disappearance. And though the town of Rensford tried to move forward, the wound remained raw. The posters, with her smiling face, had faded under rain and sun. Some peeling off lampposts, others half buried in dirt along roadsides. Her parents had clung to hope through vigils and prayers, but as the seasons changed, so too did their desperation. Then, in the spring of 1999, something arrived at their doorstep that reignited both fear and hope in a way they could never have imagined. It was a plain white envelope, tucked carefully into the Carter family's mailbox. There was no return address, and the postmark gave no clues about where it had come from. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly typed. The words were chilling in their simplicity. The writer claimed to know Emily, claimed to have her, and then shared a memory so personal, so private, that her parents froze as they read. The letter described an argument Emily had with her brother the week before she vanished, mentioning the exact words exchanged and the slammed bedroom door that followed. This was something never shared publicly, a detail only the family and Emily herself would have known. The Carters turned the letter over to police immediately. Investigators tried to dismiss it at first, suggesting it might have been a cruel prank, but the accuracy of the memory couldn't be ignored. 2 weeks later, another envelope appeared. This one described the scar Emily had carried since childhood, a small mark on her ankle from when she fell off her bike at the age of 8. Again, The information was correct. Again, it was something never reported in the news. Whoever was writing these letters knew Emily intimately or had access to her. Then came the most horrifying development. A third letter arrived, and this one contained more than words. Folded neatly inside was a grainy photograph. It showed Emily bound to a chair, her face pale and terrified, her wrists tied with coarse rope. Behind her, the wall looked like unfinished cement, as though she were being held in some kind of basement or storage room. The photo was dated 2 months after she had disappeared, meaning she had been alive long after the search for her began. The image sent shockwaves through the investigation. If it was real, then Emily had been held captive somewhere in or near Rent. The police scrambled to trace the origin of the letters, but each one was typed on a standard typewriter and mailed from different nearby towns, leaving little forensic evidence behind. The envelopes carried no fingerprints, no smudges, nothing that could be used to track the sender. The Carters lived in a constant state of dread, waiting for the next letter, fearing what it might contain. Then, as suddenly as they had started, the letters stopped. No explanation, no warning, just silence. The silence was almost worse than the letters themselves. Without them, there was no way of knowing if Emily was still alive, if she was suffering, or if she was already gone. The case had transformed from a local tragedy into something far more sinister, a game of control and torment being played at the expense of a broken family, and whoever was behind it seemed to know exactly how to push their pain to the limit. In 2001, 3 years after Emily's disappearance, the town of Rensford had settled into a strange rhythm of grief and unease. Life went on, but beneath every smile and every conversation, there lingered the shadow of what had happened. For the Carter family, time only deepened the wound. They lived with unanswered questions, their lives tethered to the hope that anything would eventually bring clarity. That clarity came, but not in the way anyone could have expected. A woman named Karen Miller had recently purchased a small home on the outskirts of town. It was a modest property, unremarkable to anyone passing by. Yet it had once belonged to a man the community barely remembered, Gerald Myers. He had lived there alone, keeping to himself, and then one day he simply left, moving away without explanation. Karen, eager to settle into her new home, began cleaning out the basement when she noticed something odd. Behind a wooden panel in the far corner was a small door, hidden so carefully that most people would never have noticed it. When Karen pried it open, she was met with a sight that made her blood run cold. The hidden room was small and suffocating, with no windows and only one dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Against the wall was a thin, stained mattress. Chains dangled from metal rings bolted into the concrete. Scattered across the floor were objects that seemed too personal to belong to any previous tenant: hair ties, notebooks, and scraps of clothing. Among them was a school ID card bearing the name and face of Emily Carter. Karen fled the house and called the police. When investigators arrived, they searched the hidden space carefully. They found Polaroid photographs, each showing Emily in different states of distress. In some, she appeared exhausted, her eyes hollow and frightened. In others, she seemed to be pleading with whoever was behind the camera. The realization hit. Investigators hard Emily had been alive after her disappearance, kept in that hidden room and photographed by someone who had no intention of letting her go. The most chilling discovery was the construction of the room itself. The walls were soundproofed, designed to muffle any cry for help. To the neighbors who had lived nearby, the home had always seemed quiet. No one had ever heard screams. No one had suspected anything unusual. Gerald Myers, the reclusive man who had lived there, became the prime suspect. Police tracked him to another state where he had been living under a different name. He denied everything. He claimed he had never seen Emily, that the room was not his doing, that someone else must have planted the evidence. His calm demeanor only added to the unease surrounding him. Despite the damning photographs and the personal belongings found in his basement, the lack of a body or direct forensic evidence made it difficult to build a case strong enough for conviction. He was arrested, interrogated, and then released when charges could not be made to stick. For Emily's family, it was a devastating blow. They were left with the knowledge that Emily had suffered terribly, that she had been so close, hidden in plain sight. And yet they still had no answers about a final fate. The room in Gerald Myers' basement was not just a crime scene, it was a haunting reminder of how close the truth had been all along, and how easily it had slipped through their fingers. In 2008, a decade after Emily Carter first vanished, her case had grown cold. The evidence from Gerald Myers' basement lingered in dusty files. The photographs and belongings cataloged, but never fully explained. Some investigators believed they had missed their chance, that whatever happened to Emily would remain an unsolved mystery forever. But fate has a way of dragging buried truths back to the surface. That year, a construction crew working near an abandoned factory on the edge of Rensford made a discovery that shocked the town once again. While digging foundations for a new development, the workers unearthed a shallow grave. Inside were human remains, badly decomposed, but something about them immediately stood out. Resting against the bones was a small silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant, the very one Emily had been wearing on the night she disappeared. When the remains were confirmed through DNA testing, Emily's family finally had an answer to the question that had haunted them for 10 years. Emily was dead. The discovery brought closure, but it also opened a door to something far darker than anyone imagined. Alongside Emily's bones were fragments from another body, this one belonging to a girl who had never been reported missing. She was younger, perhaps 14, but her identity was unknown. The discovery suggested that Emily had not been Gerald Myers' only victim. What had once seemed like the story of a single girl's abduction was beginning to look like something much larger and much more terrifying. Investigators immediately returned to the abandoned factory and conducted a full search. What they found inside was horrifying. In a locked storage room in the basement, they uncovered a collection of journals. Each one was meticulously kept, the handwriting neat and careful, almost obsessive. The journals described, in disturbing detail, how the author had stalked, abducted, and held young girls captive. Every step was outlined with precision: the surveillance, the method of abduction, the ways he ensured no one could hear them. One journal matched the timeline of Emily's disappearance exactly. It mentioned her red jacket, the silver necklace, and the way she cried on her first night in captivity. The words were clinical, detached, as if written by someone documenting an experiment rather than describing human suffering. Even more chilling was the fact that the journals did not stop with Emily. There were entries describing 2 additional victims, neither of whom had ever been found. No names were given, only ages and brief details about their lives. One was said to be from a neighboring county, the other from a town nearly 50 miles away. Both were young, both were vulnerable, and both vanished without any record in police database. The implication was horrifying. If these entries were true, then Gerald Myers had killed more girls than anyone realized. And the scope of his crimes had been hidden in plain sight for years. The style of the journals bore a striking resemblance to the anonymous letters the Carter family had received years earlier. The same phrasing, the same way of recounting memories that were too private to be faked. Investigators believed they had finally uncovered undeniable proof that Myers was the man behind both the letters and Emily's captivity. Yet, despite the evidence, one crucial question remained unanswered: how many more victims might there be, and where were they buried? The abandoned factory had been only one hiding place. For the first time, the community realized that the horror of Emily's story extended far beyond what anyone had feared. This was not just the case of a missing girl. It was the uncovering of a predator who had built his life around cruelty, manipulation, and murder. A man who thrived on playing with the grief of others while concealing the full extent of his crimes. In 2009, after the discovery of Emily Carter's remains and the journals hidden in the factory basement, investigators finally had enough to arrest Gerald Myers once again. He was charged with murder, abduction, and a string of related crimes that painted him as one of the most calculating predators the state had ever seen. The case drew national attention. Reporters filling the courthouse steps, cameras following every move as the community waited for the justice. They had been denied for over a decade. For Emily's family, the trial was supposed to bring closure. They hoped to hear Myers speak, to hear him explain why he had chosen Emily, and to find out what happened to the other victims mentioned in the journals. Instead, they were met with silence. Myers showed little emotion during his time in custody. He did not answer questions, did not react when confronted with the photographs or journals, and never once acknowledged Emily's name in court. The few words he spoke were limited to legal necessities, leaving investigators and prosecutors with the haunting sense that he would never willingly share the truth. Then, just weeks before his trial was set to begin, Myers was found dead in his jail cell. He had taken his own life during the night, leaving behind no confession, no explanation, no closure for the families of the girls he had destroyed. The sudden end to his life left investigators furious and families broken. The Carter family, who had spent more than 10 years waiting to confront the man who took their daughter, were robbed of that chance. They buried Emily's remains, but the ceremony was quiet and heavy, filled with unanswered questions that seemed destined never to be resolved. For them, closure was a word that had lost its meaning. They had the truth of her death, but not the story of her final days. The journals Myers left behind only deepened the mystery. They documented at least 2 more victims beyond Emily and the unidentified girl found near the factory, but their identities remain unknown to this day. Some investigators believe those victims may never be found, the remains hidden in places that Myers alone knew. Others fear the journals may not tell the full story, that there could be even more victims scattered across forgotten corners of rural towns. Without Myers' cooperation, every possibility remains open, and every missing person case in the region has been re-examined for ties to him. What unsettled the community most was the idea that Myers had lived among them for years without suspicion. He was not a drifter or an outsider, he had been their neighbor, the man buying groceries, shoveling snow, and waving politely from his porch. His ability to hide in plain sight forced people in Rensford to question how well they really knew the faces around them. Parents became more protective. Children were no longer allowed to walk alone, and the innocence that once defined the town was gone forever. The case of Emily Carter is still spoken of in hushed tones, not only for the cruelty of her captivity, but for the way it exposed the darkness that can hide behind ordinary walls. Investigators believe Myers could have been responsible for a series of disappearances stretching beyond the town, but with his death, the full truth may never come to light. What remains is a chilling story of control, secrecy, and suffering that no streaming service has dared to retell in full. The horrors left behind were not shaped for entertainment. They were real, raw, and devastating. And the unanswered questions ensure that the case will remain unfinished, haunting everyone who remembers Emily Carter's name.